Good afternoon. I wanted to talk with you guys about the sewing machine test. So in Apparel 1, you must take the sewing machine test, and this top part will be the oral test. So you will be identifying 1 through 10 to me on the sewing machine, and then you will perform B through F, and I check it off as I come around and check for B, threading the upper part of the machine, C, threading the bobbin case, and D, bringing the bobbin thread up and being prepared to sew. The other two you guys are going to hand in on a piece of fabric that is going to look like this. So you'll have all of the stitches on here once you have completed the E and F section of your sewing test. For my virtual students, you guys will not be doing B and C, D, obviously, because you are at home, but I will make a test out of this video based on everything that I am getting ready to tell you about the sewing test in class. So let's get started with our sewing test. So you can see that we are using the Bernina 325 sewing machine in class. We have always used Bernina, and the older ones are slightly different, but they're still great machines. So let's get started with the first thing on the list, which is the stitch length regulator. And this is located right here. The length gets longer as it goes up. When I turn the sewing machine off, you can see that the stitch length goes away on the computer screen here. So I turn it back on, and it will automatically set at 2.5 here. But I prefer that you guys sew on 3. So I'm going to raise my stitch length up to 3 here. That is just going to be easier for you to take out as you're sewing. It's just a good regular stitch. Most every single thing that we're going to do is going to be sewn on a 3 regular stitch. However, I can move it up to a 5, which is a basting stitch. And basting just means that it's temporary. You can take it out. You can do gathers with it, and back stitching is not needed and should not be done on your basting stitch. If I hold up my basting stitch here and I pull that basting stitch, you can see what I'm talking about when I say that it is gathered. Okay, so it's got the little gathers in there. It's just like a gathered skirt. That was done with your basting stitch. Okay, so you're going to set your machine on a 5, and you're going to do a basting stitch. 3 is your regular stitch, which is what we're going to sew on most of the time, and then 1 is your reinforced stitch. So the reinforced stitch is basically done when you want to make sure something stays in place, like pockets, corners on bags and purses, anything that you want to have a super tiny stitch. And if you look closely here, you can see the difference between the stitch lengths. So your basting stitch is going to be 6 to 8 stitches per inch. The regular stitch is going to be 10 to 12 stitches per inch, and the reinforced stitch is going to be 15 to 20 stitches per inch. Next is the zigzag, which is stitch width regulator, which is here. So if I press this up, you can see that the width got larger. When we sew, we are always going to keep our width on 0 here unless we are sewing a zigzag stitch. So on your sewing test, it requires for you to sew a wide zigzag. So to do your wide zigzag, you have to have your sewing machine set on 5.5 and a 5 or 5 and 5, whatever the highest number is. This is the wide zigzag here, and I believe the tension was a little off on this sewing machine, so it looks like it's pulling together, but that is your wide zigzag stitch. This is just a decorative stitch that I did just to demonstrate, but that is not necessary for this particular activity. The next thing that we're going to look at is the hand wheel before I move it down a little bit lower. So this is your hand wheel here. It's on the side of your sewing machine, and you're always going to turn the hand wheel towards you. If you notice the needle here, you can see that as I turn the hand wheel towards me, the needle goes down in the fabric. So when we first start to sew, we want to make sure that the needle is down in the fabric so that it is not going to tangle our fabric whenever we get ready to sew. So the next thing that you guys need to know is the feed. This is the general area of our needle and sewing activity. This here is a rigid edge. The feed or feed dogs, just depending on what you call it, go up and down, and they move the fabric to the back of the sewing machine. So they pull the fabric through the sewing machine whenever I turn my needle. You're always going to turn your hand wheel towards you. You're never going to want to turn it backwards unless your thread gets stuck in your bobbin case in the bottom, and then you can turn it backwards and forwards. Just wiggle it back and forth to kind of break it free a little bit, but you always want to turn your hand wheel towards you. The next thing that's down here underneath is the needle clamp. If you turn it a half a turn, the needle will come out. This needle has a flat edge on the back, so the flat edge actually has to be the one that is inside. It goes towards the back when you insert your needle back in. And don't tighten it up so tight that you can't get it undone. Now, you will notice that your needle is in the center here of your foot. This is the presser foot. It is what holds your fabric down. There is a handle back here that you can move up and down. But whenever you get ready to sew, you want to make sure that your presser foot is down, your needle is down, and you are ready to sew. Most everything is going to be sewn with the needle in the center, but sometimes you do have a need to sew with the needle to the right side. So you can adjust that, or the left side. And the way to move your needle is to use these buttons here in the center. So you can watch here as I move it. It goes over, and it also moves your needle back and forth. The next thing I want to look at is the needle plate, and the needle plate is what actually allows us to align our fabric for seam allowance. So the edge of your needle, or the edge of your foot, is 1/4 inch seam allowance. This first line is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. This one is a 1/2 inch. This one is 5/8. Your standard patterns have a 5/8 inch seam allowance, meaning you're going to put the edge of your fabric here and line it up with the needle. That's going to be 5/8 inch, and that's where you're going to sew for your standard seam allowance. The next button that we're going to look at and use is going to be the back stitch button, and that is located right here. So with it zoomed out, you can see in this area, this is the back stitch. So if you watch here, you will notice when I press it twice, the automatic back stitch will come on. When you press your foot pedal, it will sew backwards for you until you stop, and then once you stop, you can press it again and sew forwards, and then it'll begin sewing forward again. If you want to just back stitch at the beginning and the end of a seam, all you have to do is also just press and hold your back stitch button and release. It will go backwards, and then as soon as you release, it sews forwards again. This button here actually speeds up or slows down the sewing machine. And this here on the other side is your take-up lever. So the take-up lever, if I turn it around, you can see that you don't see anything here. But this is your main thread guide. So when I turn my hand wheel towards me, you see the take-up lever come up, and when I thread the sewing machine, you guys will be able to see that take-up lever and how important it really is for the sewing process. So that is it for the top part of your sewing test, the parts of the machine and identifying the parts of the machine.